Hi, I'm David Gaugh, Senior Vice President for Science and Regulatory Affairs at the Association for Accessible Medicines, or AAM, and I'm very happy to be with you today, the 6th India Pharmaceutical Forum 2021, and to present on 3 different topics. One is going to be around the user fee negotiations that are going on in the US right now. Also talk a bit about inspections and what we've learned during COVID and what we're working on with the FDA regarding inspections and COVID. And then third, update you on nitrosamines and some work that we're doing on quality metrics, many of which companies sitting in the room or in your own rooms, I guess, since we're on Zoom, but many of the companies within IPA that are also members of AAM have been working on, and I'll go into that as I go into the different parts of the presentation. So first slide is the GDUFA III negotiations update. And just to give you a little background on this, as I said a couple minutes ago, we have a working group, which is the regulatory lead from each of our member companies, that's 21 companies. Again, several of which are members of IPA and are sitting in your Zoom rooms watching this program. And so that's the working group, the 21 people that make up the group, the brain trust, if you will, for what we're doing in the negotiations with GDUFA. And then from that working group, there are, 6 of us that sit at the negotiating table with the FDA to negotiate these points. So the working group meets before the meetings. We have before the negotiating meetings, we have the negotiation, and those occur every Thursday, and they're about a 5-hour meeting. And then following that meeting, we have a follow-up meeting with the working group to download and discuss next steps and what we're going to do for the next Thursday meeting. So on this first slide, you see the 4 priorities that we're working on, and these are priorities that we've originally talked to the FDA about or met with the FDA to discuss. These would be the priorities we would go through. And so I'll go through them at a pretty high level because these are still very active confidential negotiations, so I can't go into a lot of deep detail. So if you have questions when we're done, I may not be able to answer your question, but I'll do the best I can. So the first one is the advancing approvals. And I know everyone that's in this space, if you will, that are putting your applications in. If you go back to GDUFA II, we negotiated in GDUFA II that 90% of all applications that were submitted would have a 10-month goal date, and an action would be taken within that 10 months, whether it be an approval, a tentative approval, or unfortunately a complete response letter. We would get an action within that 10 months. What we didn't realize, and when I say we, I mean the collective we, the FDA and the associations that were negotiating, is that 90% would be a pretty heavy lift for the FDA to hit. And that's a number that they have to hit because they have to go to Congress and explain if they don't hit 90% why they didn't hit 90%. So the consequence we found from that was the fact that as your applications, and let's just say it is a clean, pristine application, it's going to go through in the first cycle, or could go through in the first cycle, so it won't have to go through a second or a third cycle, but could go through in the first cycle. But as the FDA gets to that 8.5, 9-month period of time, they're realizing that there is just a couple of small things left. Maybe it's labeling, it could be any other point that they need to clean up. And they don't believe in their minds that they're going to be able to get that question to you to respond back to them to review it, and then approve it within that 10 months. So the consequence that we are all seeing now is complete response letters when we thought we were going to get an approval or a tentative approval. And so this is on both of us, industry and FDA, and they are very well aware of it. We've been talking about it for 2.5 years, what we can do to resolve this, but unfortunately, because of the statutes, the legislation that the UFAs sit under, we weren't able to make any changes. So this is top on our priority list for GDUFA III. And what we've come up with was what we're terming imminent action. And what this will do now is, once we codify this and get this in the commitment letter and it goes through the legislative process, but once that's complete, what will happen is there'll be an extended 6 60 days that will be on this application. So in an imminent action process, and the FDA would deem an application that's not quite there at the 10-month to become an imminent action, then they'll give you the information that they want, the questions that they want you to answer. And let's just say you would have probably 30 days to answer those questions, because the time window is a 60-day time window. You would have the 30 days to answer, get your answer back to the FDA. FDA would review that, and then we are assuming approve the application. And they would do it within those 60 days, so that's that imminent action window, and therefore you don't get a complete response and you do get a first cycle approval. And so we think both of us, FDA and industry, believe that this is going to be a game changer, if you will, for us, so that you're not getting complete response letters, which then puts you into a 3, a 6, a 9-month additional cycle, and it is a second cycle review process. So this has been something that we've worked on for about 3.5 months and coming to conclusion, but it's looking very promising for us. With this, with B, C, and D, so the use of mid-cycle division letter reviews, we want to make sure that they are using those to the max, which they have not been in the past months or past couple of years. Use of information requests and division review letters, so the IRs and the DRLs, would all be taken advantage of and help in this imminent action or this additional 60-day time window for our approvals. So with that's really what the advancing approvals is all about, and an imminent action. So that we've pretty much closed out, and we'll be moving forward. Part D in there is the pre-submission facility correspondence, or the PFC. When we negotiated this in GDUFA II, this was to be able to get an 8-month window or a priority review. And what the FDA said at that point in time was, that's great, we'll do that, but we need you to provide your facility information 2 months prior to you submitting your application. That would give the FDA time to start reviewing the information about the facilities, put them in the right time window to be able to make that 8-month priority review. What we anticipated at that point in time was they would create a 356H form that was a little bit more robust than the normal 1-2-page 356H form. What we found out, as you all know, it was the guidance that came out was a 27-page guidance, and it needed a lot more than just the locations of the facilities in your application. There were even bioequivalence information that they needed, etc. And so what we've found as industry is it takes, basically you're doing your application at that point in time. So why do an application review, get all the information, submit it, and then 2 months later submit your application, submit the PFC, and then 2 months later submit your application? That just didn't make sense to us. So we had requested that the FDA delete the PFC process, but the FDA has said that they've had several applications that have come in. We're still working on refining what that PFC would look like and what documents are needed, what information is needed in the PFC documents. So that's still ongoing, but just to know that we're working to try to update that. I'll now move to number 2, which is establishing a sound foundation. And this is the priority that the FDA put forward. And this is in essence to help predict year to year what the requirements or needs are going to be. So if, for example, today we predict about 1,000 applications submitted per year. So let's say in 1 year we end up submitting 1,400 applications. That wasn't taken into consideration under the negotiation process, and it would be a spike that they weren't aware of, we weren't aware of, and they don't have the resources to cover. So this resource capacity planning adjuster would potentially help do that on a year-to-year basis. In today's environment, we negotiate today, if you will. It's implemented, this GDUFA III is implemented in fiscal year 2023, so October 1 of 2022 it would go into effect, and it would be in effect for 5 years and unchangeable for 5 years because of the legislative statutes. This resource planning, capacity planning adjuster, and operating reserve adjustments would be allowed to be looked at and reviewed on an annual basis. And so if you see spikes or drops in those resource needs, then adjustments could be made year over year versus waiting till the very end. This is still under review. We've not gotten to the point yet where we would agree with the capacity planning adjuster metrics, if you will, and the formulas that they are using for that, but it's under review and we're working and negotiating through that, so I wanted to make sure you're aware of that. The other piece of this, so 2D, is the revised section 905 of FDARO. And if you want to read that, you can, but that was some legislative language that was put in FDARO that will take effect in 2023, so really fiscal year 2024. So it's actually already in place that would affect GDUFA III going into GDUFA IV. And what this particular language says is it limits what the FDA can spend user fee dollars on. For example, they can hire FTEs, they can purchase computers for those FTEs, but they can't do anything as far as buying desks or remodeling or building a wing onto a building. That's all limited that they can't spend. They've asked us to help them push this back through Congress and remove 905. We've put this one on hold because it's a very political football, if you will, that would put us in between what we want to do with GDUFA on Capitol Hill and with the legislators and what we want to do with other non-GDUFA but very important legislative actions. So at this point in time, revising section 905 is on hold, but just so it's there and you're aware of that. Inspections, I'm going to cover inspections as far as GDUFA goes here, and then I'll come back to it in a future slide to talk a little bit about lessons learned during COVID. But in the inspections, we've been looking at several different options that we think can help improve what we're trying to accomplish. So if, for example, or I shouldn't say if and when we get warning letters, we're looking to set up a meeting that follows the issuance of a warning letter so that you really have the opportunity, which we've all wanted, hoped for, needed, to have a dialogue with the FDA. As we all know now, they give us a warning letter. We have to respond to that warning letter within 15 business days. And then there's no requirement for them to respond in writing, verbally, or at any point in time. So we want to put that in place where it has a more robust requirement that benefits us, not just the FDA, as it is now, so that we know where things are and where they're going. B is reinspection of a facility following a warning letter or an official action indicated. So we want to look at some time points around this. We don't want to set a time, for example, that, we get a warning letter and so we want to say in 6 months you'll reinspect us, because we may not be ready in 6 months. We may be ready in 2 months. We may not be ready for 9 months. But we want to be able to put a time point in there that once we have remediated our warning letter criteria, then we can say we're ready for inspection, and we would get that within a certain time point. Partial release of a warning letter. So for example, if you have a facility that has segmented areas within the facility and products are made in those different segmented areas, and the warning letter really just affects or is pointed typically at that one segment, and let's just say you have three. One is really, the warning letter is really emanating from, the other two are not. So we want to see if we can get partial release or release of those other two that are not really the sections affected by the warning letter. So working on trying to get that accomplished. Reclassification of a major due to a facility. So if you have any type of facility issue, as you well know now, that is automatically a major on your application. We don't think that should be the case. Not every facility action or activity should be deemed a major, and so we want to get that better defined. So majors versus minors for facility, depending on what the facility issue is. And then predictability in inspection schedules. We just want to get this built, get some predictability built into it, so we all know where we are in the inspection schedule process and the reinspection process. So again, these are, I can't give a lot of detail because this is an ongoing negotiation right now. We're in the midst of inspection discussions, so I won't go into any more detail, but want you to know that those are the areas we're focusing on. And then fourth is complex generics, and we've not gotten into complex yet. That comes after we close out the inspection, so in the next few weeks. But what we're going to be covering in the complex generics are the product development meeting and pre-submission meeting. So in GDUFA II, when we started the complex discussions in the negotiations for GDUFA II, we asked for a very similar situation to what's set up in the NDA arena. So you have an application you're working on, you have a development meeting with the FDA to make sure you're going down the right path of development, you have a pre-submission meeting to make sure that all of your paperwork and information and data being provided is there and ready to go. Once submitted, you have a mid-cycle review meeting. We also want improvements to the post-complete response letter meetings and TCONs. We don't think those are as robust as they could be for the complex generic world. And then process improvements in the product-specific guidance, which we asked for in the negotiations for GDUFA II and got a little bit of what we wanted, but not nearly everything we wanted. And so we want to push this envelope. So setting up more, for example, in GDUFA II, as we negotiated, we only got 60 meetings in the pre-development, pre-submission meeting category. 60 is not very many, as you well know, for those of you that are in the complex arena and complex world. So we're needing to expand that. Same with the mid-cycle reviews, and then the product-specific guidances. We wanted guidances written within 2 years after the approval of the NDA. FDA did not agree to that, of course, but we're going to push to get this done in a more timely fashion and with language that doesn't state FDA will aspire to, and that's what's in the GDUFA II negotiations. So that's really the update on GDUFA III and where we're going from what we got in GDUFA II and what we hope to get in GDUFA III. And I hope we'll have this wrapped up in the next few months. I've got a timeline that I'll go through next. And once that happens, I'm happy to come back and give some more updates with some more concrete information if that would be helpful. So with that, let's switch to the negotiating timeline just so you know where GDUFA is. So I've already given you a little bit of the background, but the timing of that background, it was we started the negotiations on September 17th. If you go back even before that, the public meeting was in July of 2020. And the working group that I talked about earlier, the group of 20, if you will, 2021, started almost a year before that as we pulled information together of what we wanted to talk about in our priorities. We had to discuss what we wanted in our data call reports, so the data that we request from the FDA, and they request from us as well. That was done in the summer of 2020 and back and forth between us and the FDA. So a lot of work happened well before the September 17th timeframe, and that's when we actively kicked off the negotiations for an every Thursday session. We plan to finalize these negotiations somewhere in the May-June timeframe of this year. So as I said on my previous slide, inspections are wrapping up and close to wrap up. Then we'll go through complex. We'll have a few things to clean up, and then we'll have to finalize the language of the commitment letter. And so that should take us somewhere into the probably the June, maybe even stretching a little bit into the July timeframe. Then from July to October, November timeframe, the FDA ratifiers will look at all the UFA packages. So PDUFA, GDUFA, Basufa, MEDUFA, anything that's being negotiated right now will be wrapped into an UFA package. The ratifiers will have to approve those packages and make it through FDA legal. And then they'll hold a public meeting on November, we don't know what date, but in November of 2021, so November of this year, to present to the public what that packet looks like. Again, they won't go into a lot of detail for the public, but they'll give an overview of that. And then usually January 2nd, it may not be quite the 2nd, it might go a little past that, but sometime in early January of 2022, the FDA will submit the UFA packet to Capitol Hill, and then it'll start going through the legislative review process to Congress. So there'll be hearings on the UFAs because the congressman will want to know what we agreed to, what we got, didn't get, etc. And so we'll go through those hearings and testimonies. And that'll run through January 2022 to usually the August timeframe when they will finalize their legislative language. They'll put it into a final packet, a legislative packet that will go to the president sometime in September for signature. And then October 1 of 2022 is when the user fees will be implemented. So that's the GDUFA and GDUFA timeline. The inspections that I talked about earlier, so while we are doing inspection processing through GDUFA, we're also actively working with the FDA right now on lessons learned from COVID. And in this case, when I say we, it's the pharma group, bio, the PBOA, which is the Contract Manufacturing Association, and AAM. So these four associations have come together to work with the FDA to say that you are learning a lot of lessons from COVID and having to pivot. As we all well know, inspections stopped back in the March timeframe of 2020. They have sort of restarted in the US, but when I say sort of, I would say that's very limited in that restart. And so foreign inspections are almost non-existent. Now, there are some exceptions to that almost non-existence. One is that FDA has in-country inspectors in both China and India, and they've moved those inspectors back in-country. So they are back living in and working in China and in India. But as we all well know, that's not enough inspectors. We're talking 6 to 8 inspectors in each country, not nearly enough to inspect all the facilities that need to be inspected. So with that, we've gone back to the FDA to say we need to find a better way for you to get these inspections done in foreign countries. As we know, 60% of all finished doses are produced outside the U.S., and 80% of API are outside the U.S. So if an inspection has to happen, the majority, of course, are ex-U.S. Right now, the FDA is only doing inspections outside the U.S. That are considered mission-critical inspections. And a guidance came out on January 29th. It was actually an update to a guidance. And if you go to page 4 of that guidance, and I have it here on the slide, highlighted the name of the guidance. If you go to page 4, there's a couple of sections on page 4 that give you a little bit of a view of what mission critical is. But as you're looking to get your facilities inspected, one of the things you need to do is make a case to the FDA of why it is a mission critical inspection. It's likely the two biggest things I can give you as examples would be for drug shortage or products being used in COVID right now. If you can make a case for that, that would help your case on mission critical. Unfortunately, page 4 of this document doesn't give you a line by line criteria. Here's what you have to be mission critical. And of course, in the final analysis, it is the FDA who makes the determination whether it's really mission critical or not. But that's something that will at least give you some guidance to go after. The other things that we've pushed for is mutual recognition authority. So the FDA has mutual recognition with the European Union and the 27 countries within the EU. And so as they make inspections of facilities, then the FDA is relying on those inspections and that mutual recognition authority that they have. We've asked them to work to expand that. We know they won't be able to get true MRAs in place with other countries in this short period of time, but finding ways to work with them. The other thing that we've pushed on is what's known as Section 704A4. And in that section, it talks about paper inspections, if you will. And I think you're all very well aware that in most inspection processes, the FDA will come into your facilities, use one of your conference rooms, and go through reams and reams of paper that they ask you to bring to them to review. So our point is, why does it matter whether you're sitting in a conference room there or sitting in your Zoom conference room at home? We can get these papers to you and you can review them, and that would be the paper inspection process, which they are doing and they do agree to. The final point that we made with them and are making with them is around virtual inspections. I think everyone knows that the FDA says we don't do virtual inspections, but we're pushing them to say we need you to start doing virtual inspections. And some of the points that we made to them is that the European Union, European areas like EMA and different groups within European Union, the regulatory authorities within the European Union are doing virtual inspections, and they're having very good success at it. And so in those conversations that we had with the FDA, and this was a face-to-face meeting by Zoom, of course, but a face-to-face meeting with them a couple of weeks ago. And we asked the question, why can the FDA not do virtual inspections today? And their answer was really around criteria. They said that there's not consistent criteria today that allows the FDA and all companies to have the same type of virtual equipment there ready to go for inspection. So in their point of view, they said they've gone in some trial looks in what they've done, but more in what they've talked to other regulators about. Some companies would use Google Glasses, for example, as their virtual inspection device. Some would walk around with an iPhone. And so they said, as you look at the camera optics and the pixel ratings of those pieces of equipment, they're not good enough for the FDA to be able to sit in their office, their Zoom office, and review virtually. So right now we're in the process of setting up a system whereby we can have that happen and get some criteria in place. So we're working with them on that. So more to follow on that, but it is something that we're working very closely with the FDA on. Next, just quickly, the Basufa timeline. So I know several of you are in the biosimilars. It hasn't started yet. I won't go through all of this, but as of right now, you can see the last bullet point. We anticipate March 9th is when we'll kick off the negotiations for Basufa, and the process is working the same as our GDUFA process. We have a working group. We've been working on this for many, many months, so we'll be ready to go on the 9th of March if that date sticks for those negotiations, and I can give you some more information as we go through that, because anticipated wrap up for this is in the June time frame as well, so we'll be able to come back with all of that. Going to my final slide, just a quick update on nitrosamines and quality metrics. So AAM wrote a white paper back last summer, which several of your regulatory people were involved in that white paper. And we put that before the FDA in the June-July timeframe, which was well before their time point of writing their guidance. They used several points of that in their guidance, so that's very positive. But that's not a stopping point, that's really a starting point. AAM is also working with pharma and GDUFA. GDUFA is the OTC Association in the United States. And we're also working very closely with the IGBA. Besides my day job with AAM, I'm also the vice chair of the science committee for IGBA, and we formed a working group within IGBA and the science committee that is made up right now of AAM, CGPA, which is Canada, IPA, of course, in India, and then Medicines for Europe, and that's going to be a very active group to pull our collective thoughts together to have one vision, one point that we can get back out to all the regulators and to ICH, because we think that's critically important. So very important work ongoing, and if you have any concerns about that, you can get in touch with Sudarshan and or Archana and get on the working group. We'd love to have more people involved. And then quality metrics is the last piece I'll talk about. Again, we have a working group. It's called the Quality Working Group, made up of the quality leads of our 21 AAM groups. And we put together a quality metrics principles paper. And this paper really talks to the FDA about what they can, can't, or should do, if you will. So, they've talked a lot about quality metrics. They're now talking about the quality management maturity system, all things going forward for the future. But the questions we have for them that we're putting forward in this white paper that we're sending to them is FDA has to operate under the bounds within their statutory authority, and we question whether they currently have that authority. Quality metrics data has to be collectible, and participation, by the companies has to be a fluid process. Quality metrics must be validated and collated to the FDA's goals. They must be normalized by product type and product facility pieces, and then finally must not create perverse incentives. And that's the concerns that we have, that there could be some that's the main concern, that there could be some perverse incentives around this. The working group has also put together, and several of you on this Zoom call have been on that working group, so thank you very much. But the quality metrics that we put forward thus far are 3. It's lot acceptance rate, it's product quality complaint rate, and then invalidated, out of specification, or OOS rate. So that's really where we are with quality metrics. Again, I'm happy to come back once we hear back from the FDA on where we're going to go next with this. We very much want to work with them, not quote against them, but we think we have to come together and to be able to demonstrate to the FDA that you can't create these things in an FDA box, if you will, when you don't know how that's going to play in the real world and work in the real world, and that's what we want to have conversations about. So with that, I will close. Say thank you very much for this opportunity to meet with you. I very much enjoyed it last year when we were in India, and I'm hoping if I get invited back again in 2022, that it will be live in person in India, and I'd love to be there. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your forum.